500,000, 19...
The art world, where paintings change hands for fortunes.
Selling at $95 million.
But for every known masterpiece, there may be another still waiting to be discovered.
Well, that's it.
Well, that's it, isn't it?
That is it. That is our painting.
International art dealer Philip Mould and I have teamed up to hunt for lost works by great artists. We use old-fashioned detective work and state-of-the-art science to get to the truth.
Science can enable us to see beyond the human eye.
Ta-da!
Oh, wow!
The problem is, not every painting is quite what it seems.
You successfully faked Larry's, even while you were at school, didn't you?
Yes.
It's a journey that can end in joy.
Oh, dear. Isn't that great?
It's wonderful.
Or bitter disappointment.
I can't cope with this roller coaster. What a nightmare.
In this episode, we take on one of the 20th century's most important painters.
Lot number 31, the Lucian Freud. Madam, you have it at $50 million. Sold.
Famed for his distinctive nudes, Lucian Freud was the most valuable living artist until his death in 2011. Could we have discovered a lost work? One of the first portraits Freud ever painted?
It's a very mature-looking painting. It's got power and presence, and the market love him at the moment.
But we're facing almost impossible odds, because the artist himself denied ever painting it.
Other experts believe that it is a Freud.
Or even though Freud himself
A lot of experts
says it's not by him.
Exactly.
When we're trying to prove an artist wrong, we need hard facts.
It's possible that we could have embedded in this picture a piece of DNA, perhaps.
This is our most incredible challenge yet.
Have I got it? I'm not joking now. That's extraordinary.
Disputing the word of Lucian Freud himself.
We've not taken on a task like this before.
There's no doubt that Lucian Freud was one of the most extraordinary characters of British art.
I never think about technique in anything. I think it holds you up. You have to paint on trust.
Born in Germany in 1922, he was softly spoken but with an iron will. As his fame as an artist grew, he gained a reputation as a gambler, a Lothario, the magnetic personality at the centre of controversy and feuds. Yet he moved effortlessly between low and high society. He even painted the Queen.
But it was his work that obsessed him. Each painting could take thousands of hours, creating intensely observed portraits, sometimes beautiful, sometimes disturbing. At his death in 2011, he left an estate worth almost £100 million.
Freud is one of the most important figures in modern art, and we've been contacted by a man who believes he has one of the first portraits he ever painted.
So we're going to go and see a man called John Turner, who says he's got a work by Lucian Freud.
Does he?
And the art market absolutely love it.
But from everything I've heard about Freud in the past, he's quite a tricky character, so I think we might have our work cut out. Oh look, here we are. And there's John. John Turner has had a successful career in retail design, and before that, he trained at the Royal College of Art. He has an impressive collection of pictures, but one is particularly special. He inherited it and was told it was painted by Lucian Freud as a teenager in 1939.
Well, it's certainly a painting you notice, isn't it?
It is. I mean, I'm glad to see if it's a Freud, it's got his clothes on. I was wondering what we were going to be presented with. But it's got a real drama to it, hasn't it?
Few of Freud's juvenile pieces ever appear on the market. It's unsigned, but if this really is by him, it could be a rare and valuable survivor.
And have you shown this to anybody?
I've shown it to other experts, and interestingly, they have all immediately said this is a very interesting, very important picture by Freud, until they spoke to Freud.
Hang on, tell me more about that.
In 1985, it was taken to Christie's, and Christie's initially said, yes, this is Freud, and put it into the catalogue, and then they spoke to Lucian Freud himself, and he denied it. And these are the letters from Christie's.
So Christie's accepted it as a genuine Freud, then they, spoke to Freud?
Yes.
I sent a photograph of your painting attributed to Lucian Freud to the artist, and he's now replied, I'm afraid he says this is not one of his works. So, what are we doing here?
Other experts believe that it is a Freud.
Or even though Freud himself
A lot of experts
says it's not by him.
Exactly.
It's a pretty extraordinary challenge. If we take on this picture, we're taking on Lucian Freud himself.
Yeah, it's obviously deeply annoying if the artist himself has said it's not by him. But we're dealing with Lucian Freud, and he was a tricky, unpredictable man, and it's not necessarily the end of the story.
The mystery surrounding this painting dates back to 1939, when Lucian, seen here with grandfather Sigmund and brother Stephen, arrived aged 16 to study at the East Anglian School of Painting and Drawing. There, Freud is believed to have painted the portrait, which somehow came into the hands of a fellow student, Dennis Worth Miller, the man who was to give John the painting. So how did you acquire this painting? And is there anything about the acquisition of it that gives a reason why Lucian Freud would turn it down?
I was given it by an artist called Dennis Worth Miller, who was a student with Lucian Freud at the East Anglian School of Painting and Drawing, very young, 18, 19, 20, and Freud was younger than Dennis, and they hated each other. They hated each other for their lifetime.
So why did Dennis end up with a painting by Freud then, if they hated each other so much?
The story that I first heard was that Lucian Freud had allowed Dennis to have it, to use the reverse of the canvas to paint on, because you couldn't get canvas during the war, and it was a luxury to have the canvas. The other possibility is that it was stolen.
If the painting's stolen, that could be a problem. John was told a rather mischievous story about how it may have happened. The students at Benton End were exhibiting their work in the art tent of a county fair, the Tendring Show. Lucian Freud was showing the portrait in competition with work by Dennis Worth Miller.
I heard from the story that in the morning, as the sun rose and the tent was opened, that there was an empty easel where this had sat the night before.
So hang on a minute. So while Dennis was alive, he told you two different stories as to how he might have acquired this painting,
yes.
Which doesn't fill me with huge confidence, I have to say.
It doesn't.
But whatever the route, what is interesting is they were all there, as it were, at the scene of the crime. Freud was there, they knew Freud. So, however the route, it's pretty exciting as a potential provenance.
It is, but the route is pretty damn important. And if you've got the person who owned it giving two different versions of how he came to acquire it, we have to look into that.
Yes, there lies my problem.
We've not taken on a task like this before.
No. And, yeah, it's not often that we're having to arm wrestle a dead artist who says it's not by him.
The original owner of John's picture also left him a huge archive, 80 years of photos, diaries, documents and accounts. I'm going to see if there are any clues there, while Philip examines the portrait in more detail.
What this artist is doing, and let's hope it's Freud, is he's latching upon an aspect of the face that appeals to him, and he's exaggerating it. He's doing what an artist does in the mid-20th century. You know, modern art at that time was so much about breaking rules.
As a young man, Freud was attracted to new ideas coming from Europe, experimenting with an almost grotesque style of portraiture.
We know he took a particular approach to the face. He's trying to reach in and pull out a fresh and an original style of characterization that can be called Freud.
How long have you been trying to get this Freud authenticated?
Since 1997, when I was given it.
Did you ever feel like giving up?
I've frequently given up. It goes back in the attic, and it's usually somebody else who starts it off.
And the whole journey begins again?
Yes.
Come and look at my Freud.
Yes, exactly.
You
exactly.
The two men at the centre of this mystery are John's friends, Dennis Worth Miller and his lifelong partner Richard Chopping, both now dead, who were students at art school with Lucian Freud. Tell me about Dennis Worth Miller and Richard Chopping.
They were both artists, Richard Chopping, also known as Dickie, was probably best known for the covers that he did for Ian Fleming and for the James Bond novels. And Dennis Worth Miller was a painter, and a painter of note. He was selling well in the top London galleries.
Dickie and Dennis mixed with some of the big names in modern art.
So they were close then, Dickie and Dennis and Francis Bacon?
They were incredibly close. For the last 45 years of Bacon's life, these three spent masses of time together.
And also he was friends with Lucian Freud as well, but then he fell out.
He was. That's the story of the normal lifetime of this group of artists. Constant rows, constant falling out, but that was all part of the game.
If this turns out to be a genuine Freud, what will you do with it?
If this was authenticated, this would be the one painting that I would take to auction just to see this journey through after having spent so much time on it.
Doing a valuation of the work of a 16-year-old isn't particularly easy, but actually it's a very mature-looking painting. It's got power and presence. So let's just think about that and the name of Lucian Freud. If we can attach that magical name, and the market love him at the moment, we must be talking £500,000, perhaps more.
Throughout his career, Freud painted family and friends. The sitter in this portrait, according to John's records, was a man called John Jameson. We'll need to find out more about him. But like everything associated with this picture, evidence is hard to come by. It's a portrait with a dubious past that the artist has denied painting. Why go on? But I've been looking into the character of the artist, and I think I might be onto something. The great conundrum at the heart of this investigation is why would Freud deny a painting was by him, if in fact he did paint it? Why would he do that? Is it because it's an early work and he's ashamed of it, doesn't want to be associated with it? And certainly in all the research I've done about Freud, it's clear that when it comes to his own work, being out there on people's walls or on the open market, he was very, very controlling. I've come across one interesting example. A still life from 1942 called Basket and Fruit that was sold as a genuine Freud in the 1970s. Yet when the painting was due to be exhibited in Israel 20 years later, trouble began. Lucian Freud stepped in and said that actually the painting had been tampered with and someone else had painted part of it, and therefore he couldn't acknowledge it as a work of his own. Freud insisted that the picture be withdrawn, claiming that although the original line drawing was by him, the watercolour had been added later by another artist, a man called John Craxton, who Freud had fallen out with. The gallery that had handled the original sale didn't believe Freud and engaged in a heated exchange of letters with him. John Craxton even took a test to show that his fingerprints were not on the picture. But Freud wouldn't back down. Despite Freud's protests, when Basket and Fruit was put on the market 2 years later, complete with all those indignant letters, it was sold as a work by Lucian Freud anyway. Finding out the truth about our painting will be challenging. We're going to have to dig into Freud's past. Fake or Fortune's specialist art researcher Dr. Bendor Grosvenor has come to meet the team in Soho, at the French House, a regular haunt of artists and writers in post-war London.
Hello.
Hi there.
Aye.
Well, I've got to say, I think alarm bells start ringing if someone summons me to a pub and says, here's a Lucian Freud.
But it's a crucial part of this murky story, because it was here, in this pub, that Lucian Freud used to come and drink. And other artists came here, and Dickie Chopping and Dennis Worth Miller were also here from time to time.
We're talking about the 1950s and 60s, and people were making alliances, they were falling out, there were jealousies, there were rivalries. We're talking about unreliable witnesses. That's part of the problem here.
Yeah. Well, actually, I've got a very interesting document here which gives us a glimpse into the enmities and hostilities that we're dealing with in that world. It's written by Dickie Chopping at 4:50 a.m. one morning. He woke up and he wrote a list of reasons that he was really cross with Lucian Freud, and it's actually quite useful for us, I think.
Lucian comes age 16, expelled from Bryanston to Benton End. His anger, this is Lucian Freud's anger, I assume, at Mr. Green's textile competition and the addition to his design. My anger, Dickie's anger, at Lucian's addition to my flower painting. This is a fantastic rant in the small hours, almost 50 years after they were at art school together.
I think it's interesting that they're talking about tampering with each other's pictures, and you just get a sense of how much they disliked each other. So, you know, could that explain some of the contradicting stories we've been given so far?
You know, I wonder, with this fabulous feud between the three of them, could Dickie and Dennis, just out of spite, try to pass off a fake, make some money out of it, and embarrass him while they're at it?
Yeah, I'm not sure if I go for the financial motive. I mean, when this picture was presented for sale in 1985, it was before Lucian Freud had a retrospective exhibition. He wasn't making money. The estimate was £2,500 to £4,000. Now, if you're going to fake an artist, you're going to choose bigger game.
And of course, Dickie and Dennis had original paintings by Francis Bacon that were worth far more, so why would they bother?
Yeah, and also it would be an odd thing to do, wouldn't it, with the full exposure of the art world, to put your fake into auction. I mean, everyone would be able to see it, discuss it, including, of course, Lucian Freud himself.
This story risks being one man's word against another's. What we need is hard evidence. I'm taking the picture to Libby Sheldon, expert in the scientific analysis of paintings.
So, Libby, you know what we want from you. Can you help us prove that this is an early work by Lucian Freud?
So, what date are you looking at?
So, 1939 or 1940, when he's at school and he's a 16-year-old.
Goodness, it's the sort of time when everybody experimented, didn't they?
The first thing for Libby to do is investigate the unusual backdrop to the portrait.
There's a sort of battered, almost attacked feeling to the background. And the suggestion of something else coming through?
Yes, it certainly looks as if there's another composition, doesn't it, underneath? Turn it that way. There's these trees, aren't there?
Actually, you know, when you place it like that, it's evident that we're dealing with a landscape behind, yes, with two trees, a mountain, but done the other way round.
Yes. Well, that would, of course, be typical of somebody reusing a canvas, is to negate that landscape by doing that. But you'd think, in some ways, that somebody would have made more of an effort to cover it over. It has been rubbed down using white spirit or something.
Libby's next step is to put the painting under the microscope, and she makes a fascinating discovery.
But what's that? Actually, it looks like a hair. Is it a brush hair? Or I think it's an actual hair. It goes on into the black paint.
So
quite long.
So not necessarily a paintbrush hair, but a human hair.
Human hair.
How absolutely fascinating. Yeah, it does seem to be so. Quite a long hair. So it's possible that we could have embedded in this picture a clue, a piece of DNA, perhaps.
Yes, actual DNA.
So even if we can't get to the hand of the artist, we might be able to get to his scalp.
That's true.
Bendor, meanwhile, is trying to establish who the subject of the portrait is. Tate Britain's archives hold the papers of many important artists. Bendor's hoping information found here will help to confirm evidence he's found in John's own archive.
I've got here one of the key bits of evidence about our picture. It's a note in Dennis's handwriting, which apparently identifies the sitter in the portrait as someone called John Jameson. He goes on to say that a fellow student of the East Anglian School of Painting remembers the picture being painted after the fire which destroyed the school, that was July 28, 1939, and before the outbreak of war, that was September the 3rd, 1939. So really only a 2-month window. At the moment, we don't know a great deal about John Jameson. We've just been told that he had 2 particular interests, one of which was sailors in Ipswich, and the other was black magic, which is quite a combination.
Amongst the papers of Cedric Morris, the founder of the East Anglian School of Painting, there are letters from John Jameson.
And they make it very clear that not only did he know Lucian Freud quite well, he talks about meeting him on a number of occasions, but that he had been down to the East Anglian School of Painting at some point before December 1939. And it's very likely, reading the dates, that he's talking about going there in the summer of 1939.
This puts Jameson in the right place at the right time.
For me, I find it quite heartening because we can begin to trust some of the evidence that we've been given. I suppose what we need to do now is find a photograph to see if it really is him in our painting.
My next step is to visit the place at the heart of this mystery, the East Anglian School of Painting and Drawing, which was based at Benton End House in Hadley, in Suffolk. I'm going with John, the owner of the picture, to try to understand the world his painting emerged from.
What I love about this story is it's so full of intrigue and deception. So it seems only fitting we should go back to where it all began, which is at Benton End House, and which is where the drawing school was for 42 years.
Exactly. And it's somewhere I've wanted to see ever since I knew Dickie and Dennis. But to be able to compare the old photographs and the old paintings and look at the studios and the barns, I can't wait to do it.
Lucian Freud came to East Anglia in the summer of 1939, at the age of 16, having been expelled from his last school for disruptive behaviour. Here he found an idiosyncratic art school, where young artists were largely given a free rein to develop their own talent.
So here we are in Benton End, which was like a little bubble of bohemian living in wartime Britain.
Yeah.
And it was run by Cedric Morris.
A talented artist in his own right, Cedric Morris was perhaps the most important figure in Lucian Freud's artistic development. He's seen here, painting the young Lucian.
And Lucian, Dennis and Dickie, Richard Chopping
Yes.
and Dennis Worth Miller, from whom you inherited your picture, they were all students here together, weren't they?
Yes, they're the youngest three.
And were Dickie and Dennis and Lucian friends while they were here?
They were. They were very close together, but as with a lot of these people, as they get older, a lot of rivalry came into this. But they were definitely close at this stage.
A world away from drab wartime Britain and rationing, there were long lunches of exotic Mediterranean food and wine, and a constant stream of visitors.
You can see in this photograph Lucian Freud was wearing a fez.
I think the outfits worn by the people here were pretty outlandish, and outlandish for their time.
The young artists cast aside the usual collar and tie and wore open-necked shirts and cravats, exactly like the subject of our painting. The relaxed atmosphere meant there was very little record-keeping that might help support our picture's authenticity. But John has one piece of evidence which again links the man we believe to be the sitter to Benton End.
This record you've got from your archive of Dickie and Dennis's, this is a brief moment when someone was actually keeping a record.
That's true.
And what does it show us about who was here?
This was from 1941, and they kept these records, Dickie and Dennis kept these records, and it shows who came as guests here, who was here as students, and shows us what money the people put in.
So very importantly, so
Yeah.
this was contributing to the financial upkeep of the household,
Yes.
Lucian.
Yeah.
And that can only be Lucian Freud.
Yep.
Then we've got Cedric, and fascinatingly John Jameson.
So that is a very important document for me.
It's another confirmation that John Jameson, the man we believe is the subject of the painting, visited Benton End when Lucian was there. Bendor's next job is to prove or disprove the stories about how Dickie and Dennis got the picture. If it was given to them by Lucian, or found by them at the art school, there won't have been a paper trail. But in the Suffolk County Records Office, Bendor can check out the story about the painting being stolen from an art tent.
I'm trying to chase down one of the stories we've been told about where our painting comes from. Apparently it was put into an art tent in a village fete in a place called Tendring in 1939. And just at the moment when the tent was about to open, the artist went in and discovered that Lucian Freud's painting was missing.
The tendering show did not run at all between 1932 and 1946. So if there was an art tent, it must have been at another show in 1939 or 40. The local papers are rather detailed about every aspect of these thrilling events. At the St. John's Fete here, we learn that they had a darts competition and even something called a pig rolling competition, which was won by a lady called Mrs. Death, and frankly the mind boggles. However, I've been going through the whole of 1939 and I cannot find a single mention of anything like an art tent. And worse still, for 1940, after the war has broken out, all these events stop completely. So I'm led to conclude that unfortunately the story about a painting coming from an art tent is not true. The alternatives, I suppose, is that Lucian Freud somehow gave the picture to someone else, possibly for reuse, or that the painting was taken from some other place, maybe from Benton End itself. However, the alarming possibility now arises that if this story is fake, then maybe the picture is also fake.
Given the lack of evidence, it seems unlikely that we'll ever be able to find out how Dickie and Dennis came by the painting. Perhaps our best course of action now is to focus our attention on the canvas itself. I've been doing a little research and I've tracked down a genuine Freud, painted in 1940, just a year after our own picture. The National Museum of Wales in Cardiff have agreed to let us put both portraits side by side for a direct comparison, under the watchful eye of the museum's curator of modern art, Nick Thornton.
So this is a portrait by Lucian Freud when he was 17 years old of the man who taught him at the East Anglian School of Painting and Drawing, Cedric Morris.
Yeah, it's painted by Freud in 1940 when he was still a pupil at the East Anglia School of Painting and Drawing.
Seeing them sitting next to each other, it's fascinating immediately to settle upon the brush strokes. And there seems to be a slightly hesitant, almost sort of neurotic way with little stabs of the brush that you see the contours of the face described. And I can see it in the forehead of the Lucian Freud of Cedric and our possible Lucian Freud as well.
Absolutely. I think the interesting thing that this looks more immediate, slightly more naive than our work, but there are interesting comparisons in terms of the choice of colour. They're kind of almost mixing colours across the face to create form and tone.
Let's just think about the face for the moment, because there's something to do with the asymmetry, the sort of the willful bending of the nose and the placing of the mouth slightly off-centre that I can see as a feature shared by both.
Absolutely. I mean, one thing that Freud learnt from Morris at this time was creating a sort of psychological intensity with the relationship with the sitter. And often he did that by kind of exaggerating certain features, and that it almost borders on caricature.
And if our painting is going to be by Lucian Freud, it's probably going to be a year before this.
If it was by Lucian Freud, would be a painting by a teenager. So if there is some tentativeness around it, that's something that perhaps you would expect.
I'm so pleased we've done this. We have compared our picture now to a known Lucian Freud that he did when he was 17 years old. And to my mind, there are unquestionably characteristics, similarities. Not just the characterization, that edgy, slightly unsettling way that the face is done, but also the technique. The little sort of giveaway traits that of course come from Cedric Morris, the subject of the picture. So that's great. It takes us to where we want to be, to the person who's influencing him. But of course, there's a whole load of other students there at the same time, 15 or thereabouts, all of whom are going to be picking up on this style. So we're certainly getting closer, but we've got further to go.
We're beginning to understand the world our picture came from. Now we're meeting at Philip's gallery to see if we can take the next step and link the portrait directly to Lucian Freud himself.
Hi, Bendel.
Hi. Now, our early provenance I don't think is looking very good. The county fair story, well, I just can't make it work. I don't think it's true at all. And the other stories, well, even if they are true, they're not going to give us a paper trail, so we've got nothing tangible to go with.
Well, let's just remind ourselves what those other theories were. Either Freud gave Dennis the painting so that Dennis could reuse it. You reuse the canvas when they're at the East Anglian School of Painting and Drawing together. Or Freud left it lying around and Dennis picked it up. And certainly, having been there and seen the rather chaotic way in which people worked, I think it's very plausible. I mean, look at this picture here of Cedric Morris at Benton End. You know, the canvas is just left stacked against the wall. So certainly I could imagine that Dennis picked it up, possibly from the old barn.
Yes, and I've come across accounts from other students who just say they left their artwork behind. But have a look at this. This is another early picture by Lucian Freud. In fact, it shows Dicky chopping. And we know that this picture was left at Benton until at least the 1970s.
See, that's another useful stylistic addition to our body of work in which I think our painting fits. Now, if you put the two together, immediately you see what I think is a really compelling comparison. I mean, both lapels are, you know, rather floppy and sort of organic looking. And the eyes, they're so specific, aren't they? They're both pencil sharp, and those highly sort of artificial looking, drawn in eyebrows above.
I've got a drawing here from Freud's sketchbook of 1939-40, so about the time we think our picture was made. And I think if you compare it to our picture, you can see the way Freud has sort of inserted these almost willful distortions in the face.
And I guess what Freud is looking for here, in representing this sitter, whoever it may be, is the features that really struck him. So his eyebrows, the hair, the slightly lopsided mouth. I mean, it would be fascinating if we managed to find a photograph of that chap, if those are the things that really stand out.
So stylistically, I think this picture is stacking up more and more. Now, when I was with Libby, I came across in the paint, can you believe it, a human hair.
Look at that, clear as day.
Now, if we can get DNA from it, it's not impossible that we can prove that it's Lucian Freud's.
I mean, that would be an astonishing piece of evidence for us.
John has given Libby permission to remove the hair from the picture. It's being rushed to King's College London, whose forensic science lab regularly works with the Metropolitan Police. This job is a touch unusual for expert in DNA identification, Dr. Denise Sindercombe-Court.
So Denise, we have a particular challenge. We found in the picture that we hope to be by Lucian Freud, a hair. Now, it could well be a human hair, and is it possible for us to extract DNA?
Well, first of all, we've got to make sure that we can get some reliable DNA out of it. And once that, then we need something or somebody to compare it with. Somebody who is either Lucian Freud, and I guess he's not around, or somebody who is related to him.
Hair contains a particular form of DNA which is only passed from mother to child. This means Freud's own children are no use for this test, but we've tracked down his mother's sister's daughter, and she's agreed to give us a sample of her DNA. If the hair in our picture belonged to Lucian Freud, she should provide an exact match.
So even if the hair has been encased in paint for what could be 80 years, we can still get at the DNA?
Well, actually, the fact that it's being stuck on a painting might actually preserve it, because it stops the light getting to it, stops moisture getting to it. All these things preserve the hair and preserve the DNA in the hair.
At the scene of a crime, hair is a poor source of DNA. Even with the most up-to-date techniques, it's not always possible to extract a meaningful sample. The painstaking process will take at least 4 days. But if the result brings our picture closer to Lucian Freud, it's worth the wait.
I'm in search of someone who spoke directly to Lucian Freud about John's picture. And I've managed to persuade Lucian's daughter, Rose Boyd, to give us an interview. It's an important opportunity as we understand she knows of John's picture and may have discussed it with her father. When did you first see the painting?
I first saw the painting in 2006. John showed me the painting, and then at that time I felt very strongly that I didn't want to take the painting round to my father's. I felt that if I did take it round there, he would probably put his fist through it.
So he'd put his fist through it, why?
Because he hated the intrusion of people saying, did you do this and didn't you do it? And I felt that if he hadn't identified it in the normal course of things, that meant that he didn't want to, and the reason he didn't want to was probably either because it was stolen, or that it wasn't by him, or that he hated it. I can completely understand that if you did something you didn't think was good, you wouldn't want anyone to see it. You certainly wouldn't want to sell it. Wouldn't want to put it to be in a museum.
So you didn't take it?
No,
to show to your father?
No.
You didn't dare, by the sounds of it.
It wasn't that I didn't dare. It's just I thought the painting he would destroy the painting, whether it was by him or not. I thought he would destroy it, and then I'd have to say to John, "Oh, you know you're Lucian Freud. It is no more."
So did your father ever talk about Dickie and Dennis?
He didn't like them, for reasons of his own. But my father did used to enjoy disliking people, so that's not necessarily.
He liked a good feud.
Well, not necessarily a feud, but just he would have a reaction to certain people, and some people he just wouldn't be able to stand.
Tell me how your father would go to some pains to ensure that the work that he liked would be in the public domain, but work that he didn't might perhaps not be.
He would have a destroying his paintings that he didn't like or wasn't going to finish session, so he might get one of my brothers to go round to the studio and spend 6 or 7 hours destroying paintings that he didn't feel were working. So that would be a very good and clear way of editing his work.
So revealing talking to Lucian Freud's daughter Rose there. I mean, she's given us plenty of reasons why he might have turned this painting down. He clearly loathed Dickie and Dennis. He was very controlling about his output and what left his studio. She told me that as well. But that's all speculation. I need to know, if it is by Freud, why did he reject it? This painting has been bouncing around the art world for more than 30 years, so I think it stands to reason that Freud would have been approached about this work more than once in that time. Someone must have spoken directly to him about it. And I need to find whoever that person was and speak to him or her directly myself.
While Fiona goes in search of Freud's first-hand testimony, I'm hoping science can give us a direct link between the artist and John's painting. The results of the DNA tests are in, so John and I are off to see Denise Syndicum Court.
Well, so far, John, as you know, we've got nothing that physically connects this painting to Lucian Freud. My first question to you, therefore, Denise, is have we managed to extract some DNA?
From the painting?
From the hair on the painting, yes.
From the hair in the painting. So the next question, I suppose, is have you managed to narrow that down?
Yes, we have. Well, the good quality DNA from that has given us a group that we can place that maternal origin into.
And have you been able to compare that group with the swab that was taken from the female relation of Lucian Freud?
Yes, we have.
Was it a human hair?
It was a human hair.
That's my Jack Russell out of the equation. Good.
And what was the result?
Well, we got a particular type from Lucian Freud's maternal relative, but it doesn't match with the sample from the painting, unfortunately.
How do you feel, John?
Well, it's one step forward, one step backwards.
So as much as we'd love it to be so, it's not Lucian Freud's. Well,
I'm so sorry.
No, thank you. It's fascinating to have done it. It's absolutely amazing to have done it.
Yeah.
Oh, well, we're going to have to go back to other things.
Back to the drawing board.
I'm still trying to find someone who spoke directly to Lucian Freud about John's painting. And finally, I've had a breakthrough. It seems an auction house may have consulted Freud about our picture just 5 years before his death. I've been looking into the most recent occasion Lucian Freud was shown our painting, and it appears to have been 2006. Now, he was an artist who guarded his privacy jealously. You didn't just ring him up about a picture. Everything had to go through a third party. And back in 2006, that third party was his solicitor, Diana Rostron, and she works here. And if anyone would have discussed our painting with Lucian Freud, it would have been her. Diana has ordered her 2006 files from the archive. Could they hold the answer? Right. That looks intriguing. Now, Diana, you have worked as a solicitor for Freud while he was alive for many years. How often would you be talking to him then?
I should think I spoke to him nearly every working day and occasionally at weekends.
And what was he like to deal with?
He was delightful. He was very polite, courteous. He was phenomenally intelligent.
Did you ever discuss our painting with him?
Yes, he telephoned. These are my files for 2006 for everything I did, but I had a very good idea it would be on this general file.
And you made notes of the telephone conversation?
And this was, well, a scribbled note. I'd have written it better if I thought it was going to be on a television programme, but it was just for my purposes. So the next day...
Here we go, 6th of April, LF, Lucian Freud, started by him, but someone has completed. But hang on, he's saying it is partly by him.
Yes.
Well, this is, I have to say, this is a massive breakthrough for us. Because so far all we've had is Lucian Freud saying it's not by him, or his daughter not even really wanting to present it to him because she was so worried what his response would be. But here we have as close to from the horse's mouth as we can get, that he's saying he did at least start it.
Yes.
Shirt, you have to help me here with this. Shirt, body,
neck by LF.
By Lucian Freud.
And part of head.
But he has actually done part of this painting.
I think the main thing was he knew it had been started by him, but he was sort of speculating a bit about which bits he might have done.
And in terms of who finished it?
No.
No information about that?
No, he didn't make a comment about that. I don't think you can take this as definitive. And I think you should bear in mind that he's looking at this painting how many years later? 65 years later, I think.
Just out of interest, why, when you replied to Christie's about whether Freud painted this or not, you just said, I regret he is not able to authenticate the work as by him. Why did you phrase it in that way rather than saying, he says he painted part of it, but not all of it?
He didn't want that said. I mean, he just, if they weren't by him, they weren't by him.
So partly by him wasn't good enough. It was either all by him or not at all.
Either all by him or not at all.
Philip, well, I've some rather interesting news for you, what I think is a real breakthrough for us. I'm at the offices of Lucian Freud's former solicitor, and what she said is he painted some of it, he started the painting, but he didn't finish it.
So we have that then from the man himself?
We have it from the man himself via his solicitor and her contemporaneous notes.
That's a transformative nugget of information we've just got.
It is. It has just taken us such a massive step forward.
Oh, it's a triumph.
I'm very mindful, though, Philip, although this is Freud musing about a painting decades after it was done. So I'm wondering if maybe he could have painted a little bit less than is written in this note, maybe a little bit more.
It should be possible to analyse the picture now and see whether or not there are different campaigns by different hands.
Well, that sounds like just what we need. Bendor has a breakthrough of his own. He and John are on the trail of the possible subject of the painting, John Jameson. Using clues from Jameson's letters, we've managed to identify his old school as Winchester College, and it seems they may have photographs.
So, John, I think looking at Freud's picture, if it is by Lucian Freud, it's difficult to judge a likeness from it, isn't it? I mean, in terms of a conventional portrait. But
Yes.
there are certain aspects of the face that I think we can assume that Freud featured because they struck him. So the slightly tilted mouth, the piercing eyes. We've got, the hairstyle is quite good to focus on, so we've got a little side parting there and the hint of a widow's peak, and sort of dense curly hair.
Long face.
Slightly longer face, yes.
So I've got some photographs here of Jameson when he was here from 1933, the year he left. So if I'm sorry to test you like this, but it's probably quite a good exercise. If I cover up the names,
you need glasses for this,
because that'll be a good test as to whether actually we're spotting a likeness. See if anyone in this photograph strikes you as the sitter in your portrait. Take your time.
Okay, so this is the multi-million-dollar. Choose which one. I think I'm going to go there. Have I got it?
No. I'm not joking, that's him.
No.
Yeah.
That's extraordinary.
There are definite details that match here. Eyes close together and those distinctive brows. The long nose and prominent ears, the off-centre mouth with the slight upward kink on the left, plus the thick hair with the side parting. What you've done here is actually, I'm really pleased about that.
Extraordinary.
I think it's a really valid demonstration because these are the features that Freud has picked up on and they've translated into that picture.
But what it really fascinates me about that as well is that so many people over the 20 years that I've owned this painting saying, well, it's not a very good portrait, is it? Well, it must be.
It must be, exactly. That's such a telling point. And Freud, as we know, was actually a brilliant portraitist.
And that point of a very early, precocious talent.
Yes.
Of portraiture.
It's got to be him, hasn't it?
Yeah, yeah. I'm knocked out by that, I really am. It's incredible.
Good.
This suddenly seems a more accomplished portrait than we thought. Building on Freud's own admission via his solicitor, I think we can go further and argue that more of the figure of Jameson is in fact by Lucian Freud. I'm heading back to see Libby Sheldon. Can her scientific analysis help us to understand which parts Freud painted and which, if any, he did not?
Okay, Libby, the stakes are really getting higher. We have recorded the words of the artist himself when he was alive, that the body, the shirt, the neck, and a part of the face is actually by him. Now, the question is, can we determine what the artist did and what someone else might have done?
The neck, what does he mean by that? Because
I mean, that's a good point. Is he incorporating the skin up here, or is it just this cravat?
interestingly enough, this is one point which I've been looking at, and you can see that the white and the black or blackish blue of the scarf is very well integrated.
Yes,
with the white.
So in other words, the shirt, the wet paint of the shirt is going into the wet paint of the scarf.
Yes, there's absolutely no time difference. I wouldn't say that this is put on top.
So I suppose the big question, therefore, is can we find something similar to the treatment of that scarf in the face?
It's interesting because this black here and this browny black of the hair are very closely related physically in terms of the pigment makeup and the manner in which they've been applied.
Libby believes that if Freud painted the cravat, he also painted the hair. And her pigment analysis can help link other parts of the head to Freud. The white of the shirt and the forehead are the same pigment, and we know he painted the shirt. These areas of mixed pink and yellow match up and feature the same distinctive brushwork. The way the black and the white paint of the eyes is worked in with the surrounding skin shows they couldn't have been added later. Lastly, the paint over most of the face is a consistent one layer thick, making it highly unlikely that a later hand completed it.
He's actually painted it using the underlying landscape. So you see this green here, that just goes under the red of the lip.
Actually, that's really interesting, isn't it? Because it shows it's not an unfinished picture. The artist is trying to use the scraped down background with the landscape showing through as part of the overall composition.
I don't think he minded that landscape. I think he was making the most of it.
Okay, so everything you point out seems to suggest that this painting came together in one thought process, in one campaign.
Absolutely, I don't have any hesitation really in saying that the links all over the painting really tie it into a single artist. It would be very surprising if somebody else took up exactly the same way of using the brush, exactly the same range of pigments, applying them in the same way. I'm absolutely certain that it's a single hand.
Armed with Libby's scientific findings and the note from Freud's lawyer, we've come as far as we can. We've persuaded 3 leading authorities on Freud's work to now give their verdict on our picture. James Kirkman was Freud's art dealer for 30 years. Art critic William Fever is Freud's biographer and was a close friend. And Toby Treves is currently compiling the Catalogue Raisonné, a complete list of Freud's authentic work. While we're confident of our evidence, it's quite another thing to ask 3 experts to put their reputations on the line and go against the opinion of the artist himself.
This is not the usual fate or fortune verdict, because normally when we find ourselves before a panel of august experts such as yourselves, we're asking, is the painting by a particular artist? But we already know, through Lucian Freud, from a conversation he had with his solicitor, that he painted at least the shirt, the body, the neck, and part of the head. That much we already know.
So, gentlemen, the opinion of you 3 combined will be extraordinarily important in relation to this picture. In fact, it will be make or break. Now, the more we've looked into it, the more we consider this whole work to be by Lucian Freud, but that is our view. We now need yours. We need to ask you the question, can we call this, can we baptize it, a work by Lucian Freud?
I think one thing we've got to ask ourselves is why Lucian was unhappy about the picture, why he has apparently rejected it. Every artist is unhappy with certain pictures that they've done, particularly what you've done when you were at school.
I think being a schoolboy, basically, he just put it down at the end of the day and went on to something else later.
But does he think it's finished? If we're looking at this as a finished painting, it's hard to argue that the landscape itself is anything we've seen in any other Freud painting.
I think it was a schoolboy's early attempt at a portrait, and it works pretty well in those respects, I think.
Yeah, I think it's good.
Except for the cravat. The cravat is awful.
It's not finished.
It's time for the experts to reach their verdict. Behind closed doors. We're hoping that the combination of Libby's evidence, a single hand at work on the painting, and Freud's own admission that he at least started it, will be enough.
When we found that note, kept by Freud's solicitor, in which he said that he had painted part of this painting, it felt like the smoking gun. But as it turns out, the truth is much more complicated than that, as ever with this picture.
I mean, what a test. Are they going to be able to say, after an artist has said it's not by him entirely, that it is? It's frankly a real conundrum.
Hi, John. After much deliberation, a verdict has been reached. It's time to tell John whether or not he's the owner of a £500,000 Lucian Freud.
Well, it's quite a while since we've all been together, here, with you and your painting.
True.
How are you feeling?
I think after 19 years I can well and truly say very, very apprehensive.
Well, it's become more interesting since we last met.
Right.
I had a conversation with Lucian Freud's lawyer, Diana Rostron. As far as you knew, Lucian Freud had denied that this painting was by him.
That's right, yeah.
She'd asked him about your picture. Freud said he did paint part of this picture. Now, that's what he said in 2006.
The fact that this was on Lucian Freud's radar, that he spoke to his lawyer about it, is absolutely incomprehensible to me.
So this was a massive breakthrough.
Unbelievable.
And I have to say, we've analysed this picture really carefully. And personally, I'm entirely satisfied that it is by Lucian Freud.
So that was the moment where we decided to convene a body of experts.
And they discussed it and have some reactions.
What's in here?
This, after 19 years, is just sort of happening in slow motion to me at the moment.
So this is from the three of them. We believe this to be a work Lucian Freud did at art school, most probably in 1939. There is a split decision regarding the landscape, and the majority believe that it is part of the original painting.
Okay, so with my head still spinning, it begs just one big question from me. And forgive me if I'm being thick. Is it or isn't it a Freud then?
Well, the thing is, what you had was door slamming in your face for 19 years.
Exactly.
What you've got now is you've got three of the most august experts pronouncing on this painting, and you've got two who are happy to say, William Fever and James Kirkman, it's a Freud.
Toby Treves, the more cautious voice, is preparing the catalogue raisonné. He concedes the figure is probably by Freud, but argues that it can't be put into the full catalogue because he feels the picture is unfinished and the landscape behind not intended to be seen. So on current evidence, he would only include the picture in the appendix, but it would still have considerable appeal.
I can confidently say that this work is worth £200,000 to £300,000 because of the mixed response, and quite possibly more. It is by Lucian Freud, but the question is, how much is by him? And that's a nice problem to have at this stage.
Wow. Wow. Well, I'm kind of speechless because, I mean, it's just been, as you know, standing here a few minutes ago, not knowing which way this was going to go. But it's just extraordinary that you've got it, you've discovered this. I mean, it's just extraordinary that that's come out of it.
You happy with that
Thank you
result?
so much. Well, thank you very much. Yeah, I'm delighted. I mean, amazing. It's just, I just kind of feel also that I wasn't mad. It's just when I just look, I'm close to it, the lights, and just seeing the colours and the paint build up and things like that, I wasn't mad.
Well, I don't know about you, but I think that's a result.
I think it is. And also, we've broken new ground. I mean, never before have we had to prove that a picture is by an artist who has denied it. Not any old artist, but one of the great figures of British art in the 20th century.
Yeah, and of course it's a reminder that this game isn't cut and dry, is it? Attribution is a human process. It's about different shades of response. And let's look at what we've got. We have a painting that is either by Lucian Freud now, or largely by him.
And John couldn't be happier. If you think you have an undiscovered masterpiece or other precious object, we'd love to hear from you at bbc.co.uk/fake or fortune.
A Russian plot to shock Victorian London. Toby Jones is the secret agent at the centre of a deadly mission. Next tonight, unmissable new drama on BBC One.